judgments right away and say, oh, well, when he's leading, like he's praying like this, but I've seen him praying by himself and he prays so quickly. Right? That's definitely not happening. Um, and that's what Ghazali closes with here, saying that, okay, yeah, it doesn't affect the past action, but it opens the door to problems in future ones. And this is why it's something that's so dangerous. Um, and it's fine for us to recognize it in others. So when we speak about others and we see somebody doing something well, should we mention it or no? Yeah, if I see a good action in others, is it something that I should mention? Is it something that I should praise? Yeah, absolutely. Why? Right. Ideally, my intention should be to what? If I see someone is like, mashallah, you prayed really well, or somebody like, man, I saw you giving all that money, that was wonderful. What is my intention behind that? Right, to encourage them to do more. Right, that's the reason that we do it, because we want to encourage people to do that. And someone might say like, oh, you shouldn't praise him because you could put riyah in his heart, what ujub, right? Like he can start thinking that he's something. Why do I not need to worry about that? Or why should I worry less about that? Right, because I'm not seeking it, right? And I'm not trying to say it to him because I want him to start thinking he's amazing. I want to say it because I want to push him to do more, right? That's my intention. How he takes it, whose battle is that? That's his battle, right? That's his personal battle, and he needs to worry about that. That's right. That's his problem, right? It's not mine. My job is to try to encourage others, right? We should always be positive. This is how he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was with his companions. Like he was a very positive person. We can't be in situations where like, oh, it's like, oh, I don't want to do this because I don't want him to fall into that. That's not my job. I don't need to worry what he's going to fall into and what he's not going to fall into. My job is to be an encouraging Muslim, to be an encouraging member of the community, to push others because I want others to succeed. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, he said, I have not prayed a prayer since I became Muslim and then informed my soul about it, nor have I followed a funeral and then informed my soul about it. What is he saying here? What does that mean? Right. He prayed with khushu'. He prayed with khushu'. He did those actions, and not that. He didn't care how he felt about those actions after he did it. Does that make sense? Yeah, yeah. He didn't have to tell himself like, "Oh, I just prayed." Do you understand? So it's like when I prayed, he never said, "Oh, I just prayed," right? Or he never followed janazah, and he was like, "Oh, I just followed this janazah." You guys see that? You understand what he's saying or no? I'm sorry. Right. So he's basically like, well, I'm supposed to do this. Why do I need to? Why do I need to talk about it? Why do I need to boast about it? Right? These are obligations that he's doing. And the reason that he doesn't mention them to himself is why? Because he never wants to fall into a state where he is proud, not in a not in a good sense, but that he starts seeing himself higher and better than others. Ibn Mas'ud, he said, I have not woken up in the morning wishing to be in any other state. What is he saying here? Right? Well, not just that. I've woken, and basically he's saying that I've woken up in a state of what? I've woken up in a state of iman. Right? I've woken up in a state of belief. This is essentially what he's saying. And you're right that the meaning for this, like one of the meanings is like I'm thankful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed me to wake up every single day as a mu'min, and I'm thankful of being in that state. And there is this sense of self-recognition in some of these statements, right? Like he's recognizing what his position is, he's recognizing what his status is. Uthman radiallahu anh, he said, I have never sung, wished, or touched my beard with my right hand since I gave allegiance to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What is he saying here? Huh? What does that mean? He, hmm. That once he touched the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what did he not do? He never touched his beard. Good. Okay, why? He wanted the last thing that he touched was what? The blessed hand of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's something. So if you look at all of these things, these are things that they actually took pride in, right? That they were proud of the fact that they did these things. I'm sorry. Washed. Yeah, yeah. Like it says, I have never combed or washed. Like he never used his left. He never used his right hand to do it. Meaning that he was still combing and he was like still obviously he was still grooming himself, but he never did it with his left hand because the thing that he touched and the final thing he wanted to have touched with his right hand was what? The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Shaddad ibn Aus, he said, I have not spoken a word since I became Muslim except when necessary. I'm sorry? No, it's excellent. Meaning that every time he spoke, what did he do? He used to take account of what he did. SubhanAllah, I actually know a brother like this. He made a promise to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he would not speak except when necessary. And he's very difficult to speak to. Right? No, subhanAllah, like even when you speak to him, he's actually thinking before he speaks. You can actually see him thinking before he speaks. Um, I think I think it's a little extra. I'm sorry. Yeah. So everything you say is recorded. Not everything I feel. All of those things are there. I'm responsible in what sense? When I act on them only. If I see something and I'm doing it purposely, then I'm accountable. Dave, if I'm just walking and I see something, is it fair to be held accountable for that? Or if I hear somebody say something, if I hear kalimat kufr or shirk, I just hear it. Am I accountable for that? But if I go to listen to it, then I'm accountable. If I go to see something, I'm accountable. But if I'm passively engaged in things, if I'm walking and I hear something or I see something, those are things I'm not accountable for. Even things in my heart, there are few things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold me accountable for in my thoughts. Like so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, Inna ba'dhu dhann ithim. He says that some types of suspicion are ithim. Right? Some types. He doesn't say all types. Some types are. And which ones are those? He follows it in the same ayat, la tajassasu. Any type of suspicion that will lead me to spying, this is the type that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold me accountable for. But other types, if I'm driving and somebody cuts me off and I was like, man, I want to beat this guy. I'm thinking that, right? And I feel that. Am I accountable? No, not until I actually do something about it. So holding ourselves accountable, like holding ourselves accountable for thoughts, even the companions, they said to the Messenger of Allah, will we be held accountable for the things that we think? And he said, no. Yes. I think people are different personalities, right? There are some people who speak less. There are some people who speak more. I think we should always try to be balanced, when we do speak and we present ourselves. Hmm. No, it's important to be balanced, right? In everything, and not just that. That can be very subjective. There are times where we speak more. There are times where we speak less. Um, in general, it's always important for us to be aware when we do speak because we will be accountable for the things that we say. Yes. Sure. Yeah. Hurting him. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. You'll be accountable then. So for example, if my intention is to go and hurt somebody and I get stuck in a traffic jam, I'm still accountable. Why? Because I actually intended and I was going to fulfill it, but I was stopped by outside factors. Does that make sense? Yeah, yeah, no, no, because I intended on fulfilling it, right? Like I'm gonna go through with this, but I was stopped by outside factors. I get into an accident, I get hurt, something, you know what I mean? But if I'm on my way, I'm like, man, I'm gonna kill this guy, and then I'm like, yo, what am I doing? I'm being absolutely silly. Astaghfirullah. I'm actually rewarded. So in situations where I actually have ill thoughts and I stop myself from acting on them, that's the situation where I'm actually rewarded for. But in yeah, so is it good to get into the habit of, like, even having these ill thoughts? No, right? Even that is something that's problematic. And if I find my heart constantly leaning toward ill thoughts, hurting others, taking advantage of others, I really need to like I need to reassess and readjust like what it is that I'm thinking. Inshallah. Um, Abu Sufyan, he said to his family when death approached him, "Do not cry for me, for I have not committed a sin since I became Muslim." It's bold, right? For sure. But this is the confidence he had in himself. And he probably said this for encouragement to his family. Like, hey, listen, don't worry about me. Inshallah, I feel I'm good with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he said, if Allah decides a matter for me, it pleases me whether it is difficult or easy for me. So he says, it doesn't matter how difficult that is. It doesn't matter how difficult that action is. Alhamdulillah, I feel I am able to fulfill it. And all of these display, like, where these individuals' hearts are. And that's something that's important for us to keep in mind. Like, where is my heart? What position is it in? Where do I stand? How comfortable am I with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And these are sometimes very tough conversations. And some of us might feel like, oh, well, I don't feel like I'm in a good place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like, what can I do? I'm sorry? Work on it. Right? The moment I realize that my position or my state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not where I want it to be or where it should be, what can I do? I can work on it. Like, if I do a sin, and this sin is something that might be consuming me, and something that I'm worried about, what do? I make istighfar. How much istighfar do I make? Right? Until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings ease to my heart. Right? And sometimes we don't know. It's like, man, I did something so bad, I did something so wrong, I did something so difficult, something so challenging. And where does this become a problem? Where that guilt now paralyzes me. That's the problem. Because guilt in Islam is actually empowering. It's not debilitating. In the moment that guilt stops me from doing actions, I have become selfish. That's it. I have become selfish. I've only concerned with myself. I'm only concerned about me. Right? Everything starts revolving around me. And that's not what Islam is. Islam is about understanding and pivoting and shifting. The moment I realize I've committed a sin, okay, what am I going to do about it? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, follow a bad deed with a good deed so that it can wipe it out. Allah gives us opportunity after opportunity. Our job is to seize it. In the moment we freeze, we're only doing ourselves a disservice. So the peak of us dealing with riyah and us dealing with these problems and these issues is not being concerned with people, whether they praise us or whether they put us down. What we should be concerned about is riyah. And if the reality is that we're concerned about riyah, part of this can contradict with this idea of wanting to be imitated because we want to set an example. And sometimes that looks the same. So if you have an individual who's praying in front of others, we don't know whether he's doing it out of riyah or he's doing it to teach. And this is, even though the action itself might end up looking the same. And this is something that we need to be aware of when we're looking at others, so that we do not judge them, and to make sure that we are trying to fulfill our responsibility. So displaying actions, it's always going to be this balancing act, right? It's going to be a balancing act between we want others to follow, right, and we want to teach, or we want to set an example, and whether it's tough, right? It's this balancing act that we're always trying to play because we want to remove riyat from our hearts, but we also want to set a good example. And this can be very challenging. It can be difficult. And sometimes we imitate people to do that, right? We imitate people thinking that, okay, if we do this, it will protect me from riyat. Because this person I know to be righteous, I know this person to be noble, I know this person to be a scholar, so let me just imitate him. Like, let me start dressing like him, let me start looking like him. And he's saying here that, okay, is it possible that by you imitating this person, this can actually be a type of riyah? It's narrated that a person used to pass through the streets of Basra. Basra is in modern-day Iraq. In the morning, hearing the voices of those reciting Quran in their homes. So some of them authored a book on the pitfalls of riyah in moments of riyah. They abandoned it and people lost interest in it, and they used to say, would that book had not been written. So this man, he used to walk through the streets and he used to hear people reciting Quran at night. So he wrote a book on riyah. And this book became famous, and you were walking the streets and all of a sudden what happened? People stopped reciting the Quran. And then they were like, man, it was probably a better idea this book not be written. What happened? What is the problem in this example? What's the issue here? That riyah can be for, and it can also, it can be to do an action, and also it can be to abandon an action. Right? This is part of the issue, and this is what Imam Ghazali is pointing out here. That we shouldn't do an action and we shouldn't abandon an action for others. This is what's important, because even abandoning an action for the sake of others can be riyah. And he's saying that this is extremely problematic, because now, what is the benefit that came out of this? Is there any benefit here? No. It was actually only a harm. It didn't help anyone. It didn't help anyone that they were leaving all of these actions and leaving all of these issues. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will always protect and support this religion. And it's not necessary that we harp on issues, right? A lot of times we'll get stuck on certain issues, we'll get stuck on certain ideas, and we'll try to push those onto others without realizing that if I push too much, what happens? I can actually push people out, right? If I push too much, I can actually push people away. I can push people away from the religion. So now, instead of me wanting to protect and help others with their riyah, I've completely pushed them out of the religion altogether. And I haven't really benefited anyone. Do you see how difficult this balancing act becomes, right? Like you want people to, you want to set an example. You want people to succeed. But I can't want that so much that I'm actually pushing people away and I'm actually hurting people, right? It becomes very dangerous. And this is what happens with extremism, right? Extremism in anything, especially with the religion, right? Because you make the religion so difficult. It becomes so challenging. And that's not what the deen is for. Even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Yassiru wa la tu'assiru." He said, make things easy. Don't make things difficult. Bashiru wa la tunaffiru. Give glad tidings. Don't always, give sad tidings of things. Glad tidings. Tell people about paradise. Tell people about reward. Like encourage others to do good deeds. And if you're going to lead with love, right? Lead with love. Lead with respect. And it's very sad for me when I see an entire culture that focuses more on punishment, focuses more on limitation, focuses more on like a lot of these negative aspects. And I'm like, how is that going to encourage people to practice? But I believe that within certain communities, they don't feel that sense of iman unless somebody's actually berating them, right? Unless somebody's actually telling them, oh, it's because of your sins, it's because you're wrong, it's because you're lying, because you're taking advantage of others. And until there's like this accusatory kind of display, people don't feel like, oh, I'm not practicing, like I'm not good enough. And it's this weird like masochistic view of the religion, when the religion is something that should be that attracts us, right? It's something that we actually look forward to. When we go out in the world and when we're practicing, we don't feel a lot of limitations. It doesn't mean that we don't feel any, but it doesn't mean that what's a better way of putting it? We should never feel suffocated. We should feel restricted. and that's good. But we should never feel suffocated. Just like when I'm driving, I feel restricted, right? How come I only get to drive on roads, right? Like, why do I have to follow like traffic signs? How come I have to go this speed? But am I stopped from traveling from place to place? Like, I can still get to the destinations I want to. I feel restricted for sure, but I don't feel suffocated because I can still move around easily. I can't move in every place, in every direction, in every way. But if I just imagine if I started driving on lawns, right? I started driving through road, like through forests. What would happen? More people would probably get hurt, right? Uh, more people would be like more property would be damaged. There would be less benefit that actually comes out of it. And if we think of the Sharia like this, what does the Sharia come to do? The Sharia actually came to give us guidelines. But it actually came so that society would function in a more meaningful way, in a more meaningful manner, so that we would minimize the harms that we would cause against each other. That's what its purpose is. And like I said, it's here. There are restrictions for sure, but those restrictions are for our benefit. Yes. Yes. No, absolutely. Like silat rahim, right? Understanding on how to maintain family ties, understanding the boundaries that we have with each other, understanding how I'm supposed to deal with my parents understanding how they're supposed to deal with me, the rulings on between a husband and a wife. What are the obligations of a husband toward a wife? The obligations of a wife toward a husband. Understand the obligations between friends, right? Like, how am I supposed to deal with my friends? What are their rights, right? All of the Sharia demand, like, it dictates all of these for us. It does it dictate like certain like specific minute details? Absolutely not, right? There's nothing that's like that. And those things sometimes they're set socially. So, for example, I think I've used this example before. If I go to, is Dunkin' Donuts on the BDS list? No, it's not. Okay, we could still drink Dunkin'. So, when America runs on Dunkin', they shouldn't drink it. Okay, but if I go to, you know what, Qamariya. Like, I go to Qamariya Coffee. Yemenis are still okay? No, but so like a Qamariya Coffee, if I order one coffee and one espresso, they might give me the same cup, right? But how much espresso are they going to give me? They're just going to give me like this much, right? And they're going to give me a full cup of coffee. How come people don't argue with them when that happens? How come people aren't like, hey, how come this isn't full? This cup isn't full? Yes. I'm sorry. Because culturally it's understood. When somebody orders an espresso, how much are they going to get? They're only going to get a little bit, right? That's culturally that's what's understood, and that's how it should be. In coffee, everybody understands. Like, nobody's going to argue and be like, "Hey, you're only supposed to give me this much coffee. You're only supposed to give me like 2-3 sips of coffee," because these are cultural standards that have been agreed upon, and these are cultural standards that have been set. And even how we deal with certain relationships, cultural understandings of going into a marriage. How many people in the U.S. go in, if there's no conversation beforehand, you have a couple that's getting married, and the girl comes and moves in, and he's like, yeah, our parents live with us. Is that something that's culturally common? It's like, it's a surprise. No, it's a surprise. Why? Because this is not something that culturally happens in every home. That's a conversation that needs to happen before they get married. Yeah. What do? You have conversation. No, I'm saying like you will not have agreement in everything. So when there are spaces that are like, hey, I don't know this, what do? You ask. That's what's supposed to happen in all of these transactions. If I don't know about a transaction, if I'm going to purchase a car and I want to know, like, does it have this feature? Can I just purchase a car and then get angry it doesn't have the feature I'm looking for? No, I have no right. I'm sorry? Again, you're absolutely right. But we, as individuals, we have every obligation to ask whatever it is that we want and whatever it is that we seek. And if the other party lies, now I have grounds to actually void the contract. I had a couple recently that had gotten married. He had asked her before they got married, have you had any relationships before we got married? She said no. He came to find out through her previous boyfriend that they had a relationship. And he's like, well, what do I do? I was like, well, you actually have grounds to break your marriage because she lied. And not, we're not judging her, not judging her past, not judging what happened, but you cannot lie when it comes to these issues. Yes. Sure. By not agreeing to the marriage, right? Because at the end of the day, there's a difference between disclosing sin. If somebody had said like, hey, if somebody asks like, are you a virgin? You say no. You don't have to disclose why that happened, right? It could be rape, right? Somebody could have taken advantage. You could have been married previously. There's no reason to get into details like, yeah, I was in a haram relationship. Does that make sense? And you can disclose, say no, I'm not, and say okay, that's fine. You cannot ask now. If I ask and I'm proposing and I say, hey, listen, I'm a virgin. I want to make sure that I marry somebody who's a virgin. Are you? She can say no. I can ask why, but she has no obligation to answer. Does that make sense? Um, but you can't lie. You'd be like, yes, I am, and you're not, because at the time of the contract, this was one of the agreements that you had, and once that contractual violation is there, he has grounds to nullify the marriage. I'm sorry. She can, and then he can decide on whether he wants to pursue or not. Make sense? So if she's like, I'm not comfortable answering that question, he can be like, okay, well, I'm not comfortable getting married. That's his right. Because again, the idea in even these situations, you're not judging the person, right? You're not saying, oh, you're going to hellfire or you're a sinner, you do this. No, no, no. This is like when we get married, they're married on preferences, and it's a consensual agreement. It's like, I'm agreeing to marry you on these terms. And even when we go to get married, what is one of the first understood implicit things when a couple gets married? I'm attracted to you, right? It's understood that I'm attracted to you. And that's one of the reasons they get married. Is it possible that people get married, right? They go through the courting process, they've seen each other, they've met each other, and then they go after you like, well, actually, I'm not attracted to you. It's silly, right? It's not, it's actually insulting at that point. So, like I said, there are certain cultural understandings that come into play in some of these relationships, but even those can be guided by the Sharia, right? They're not necessarily dictated, but they are guided. Hmm. I'm sorry? To what? Where learn with fiqh? Yeah. Why? Like the Sharia is the Quran and the Sunnah. Very simple. Like if somebody said, "What is the Sharia?" The Sharia is the Quran and the Sunnah. All right. How do I apply it? How do I understand it? How do I take rulings from it? What do I study? I study fiqh. Simple as that. Because fiqh is meant to help us categorize the things that are halal and haram. And once I have that, it gives me a good idea. Even subhanAllah, one of the chapters that is studied in fiqh is called Ashrat al-Nisa, how to live with your spouse. Like how do you live with your wives? And from that it details like, okay, what are the obligations, what are the expectations, how do you deal with irreconcilable differences. Like all of these things are very important discussions. Like if I don't know how to express to my wife doesn't know how to express to me, all right, what are some of the steps that I can take to bring some type of reconciliation? Is it worthy that we even try to reconcile, right? These are all things that are really important conversations that need to happen. Because the reality is, like, and I didn't mean to get too much of a tangent on marriage, but it always ends in marriage, right? So like the when it comes to marriage, like of a couple, they're essentially deciding to stay married every day, right? Like every day that they wake up, they decide that they want to stay married, and that's a really big paradigm, right? Like that's a really big deal if individuals decide that, okay, no, this is why it's important enough for me to invest. I'm so invested in this person that I want to stay married. Right? I'm so invested in my wife. My wife is so invested in me that we want to continue this relationship. And that's important, and it's powerful. Um, but it is something that is consensual. So part of that consent is understanding, like, okay, these are the terms that we're actually marrying on. But I think it's time for adhan now. We'll stop here. I'll see all of you next week, inshallah.